The night was unusually quiet for this part of town. Officer Ethan Carter had patrolled these streets for years. Yet something about this night felt different. The flickering streetlights cast eerie shadows across the cracked sidewalks, and the distant wail of a siren reminded him that peace was never permanent in a city like this. Ethan's shift was almost over when he spotted movement in a dimly lit alley. A small figure darted between the dumpsters, barely visible in the darkness. Instinctively, his hand went to his holster, but he held back. It wasn't unusual for kids from the nearby projects to sneak around after dark, often getting into trouble they didn't fully understand. He narrowed his eyes, stepping forward cautiously. "Hey, stop right there," he called out, his deep voice echoing in the alley. The figure froze for a second before bolting. Ethan cursed under his breath. He wasn't in the mood for a chase, but his duty came first. Sprinting forward, he maneuvered around trash bins and leapt over a broken wooden pallet, his heart pounding as he closed the distance. The kid was fast, but Ethan was faster. Within seconds, he reached out, grabbing the small arm and pulling the figure to a halt. "Gotcha," Ethan panted, gripping the kid's hoodie. The boy twisted, eyes wide with terror. "Please, I didn't do anything," the boy stammered. Ethan frowned. The kid couldn't have been older than 10. With messy curls and dark skin that glistened under the dim light. His oversized jacket swallowed his thin frame, and his sneakers were worn down to the soles. He looked like he had been wandering for hours. "What are you doing out here this late?" Ethan asked, scanning the alley for any signs of a crime. The boy hesitated, glancing toward the street as if weighing his chances of escaping again. I just got lost." Ethan's grip loosened slightly. "A runaway? Or something worse?" His gut told him not to jump to conclusions, but experience had made him wary. "You live around here?" he asked. The boy didn't answer immediately. His breathing was heavy, and his fingers trembled. Ethan recognized that look, fear mixed with exhaustion. He had seen it before in kids caught between bad choices and worse circumstances. "You have a name?" Ethan tried again. "Malik," the boy whispered. Ethan exhaled slowly. "All right, Malik, let's get you somewhere safe." But as he turned toward his squad car, he had no idea that this simple act of kindness would change his life forever. Malik sat stiffly in the passenger seat of the police cruiser, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. The silence between them was thick, but Ethan wasn't sure how to break it. The boy's nervous glances and shifting posture told him he didn't trust him, not yet. "You hungry?" Ethan asked, breaking the quiet. Malik shrugged but didn't answer. The kid looked hungry, though. His face was gaunt, and his lips were dry. Ethan sighed, pulling into the nearest convenience store. "Stay here." A few minutes later, he returned with a bag of snacks and a bottle of water. He tossed them onto Malik's lap. The boy hesitated before tearing open a granola bar, shoving it into his mouth as if afraid it might be taken away. "Where were you headed?" Ethan asked. Malik swallowed hard. "I was trying to find my way home." "Where's home?" Another pause. Ethan watched as Malik stared at the dashboard, his fingers picking at the edge of his sleeve. Something wasn't right. "Look, kid, if you're in trouble, you gotta tell me," Ethan pressed. "I'm not here to arrest you. Just wanna make sure you're okay. I told you, I got lost," Malik mumbled, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan sighed, pulling out his radio. "Dispatch, I've got a lost kid here." Running his name through the system, he expected nothing more than an address, maybe a worried parent's contact information. But when the response crackled through the radio, his stomach twisted. 10-4. "That's Malik Johnson. Stand by, his father is on the way." Ethan blinked. "His father?" "Confirmed. Caution advised." The words sent a chill through him. He turned to look at Malik, who suddenly wouldn't meet his eyes. "Who's your dad, kid?" Ethan asked carefully. Malik chewed his lip. "You'll see." Minutes later, a black SUV screeched to a halt outside the store. A tall, broad-shouldered man stepped out, his face set in a scowl that could freeze lava. Ethan's heart sank. Standing before him, radiating authority and fury, was Raymond Johnson, the chief of police. The store's fluorescent lights flickered as Raymond Johnson stormed inside. Ethan had seen the man in press conferences, his commanding voice demanding justice and reform. But in person, the police chief was even more intimidating. "Malik," Raymond barked, his deep voice making the boy flinch. Malik lowered his head. "I'm sorry, Dad." Ethan stepped in before the situation could spiral. "Sir, I found him wandering the streets. I was just making sure he got home safe." Raymond's sharp gaze cut through him. "You brought my son to a station like a common delinquent?" Ethan straightened. "With all due respect, sir, I didn't know who he was. I thought he might be in danger." Raymond folded his arms, his expression unreadable. He turned to Malik. "What were you doing out there?" Malik hesitated, then admitted, "I went to see Jamal." Raymond's face darkened. "We've talked about this. I just wanted to make sure he was okay," Malik said defensively. Raymond closed his eyes briefly, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Get in the car." Malik obeyed without another word. But before climbing in, he cast a hesitant glance back at Ethan. Ethan met his gaze, sensing something unspoken between them. Raymond turned to him. "I appreciate you bringing him back. But next time, call me directly." Ethan nodded, though he had a sinking feeling that their paths would cross again sooner than expected. As the SUV pulled away, Ethan stood alone in the parking lot, replaying the night's events in his mind. He had no idea why Malik had been meeting with someone like Jamal. He had no idea why the chief seemed so tense about it. But one thing was certain, this was just the beginning. Ethan sat at his kitchen table, staring at an untouched cup of coffee. His mind kept returning to Malik, to the look in the boy's eyes. There was something familiar about it, something he hadn't seen in years. He reached for the old photograph in his wallet. It was faded, creased at the edges, but the image was clear. A scrawny boy standing next to a police officer, grinning despite the bruises on his face. That boy had been Ethan. He had grown up in the worst part of town, constantly caught between right and wrong. His mother had died young, and his father had been a ghost, either lost to drugs or the streets. He had been heading down a dark path until Officer Greg Marshall had found him, pulled him out of the gutter, and given him a chance. Greg had believed in him, and because of that, Ethan had changed. Now, looking back on Malik, he saw that same turning point. The boy was standing at a crossroads, and if someone didn't guide him, he might take the wrong turn. Ethan exhaled deeply. Maybe, just maybe, he had found a new purpose. And maybe Malik was about to change his life in ways he never expected. Ethan couldn't shake the memory of Malik's face from his mind. There had been something in the boy's eyes, a mixture of fear, defiance, and something else, hope. Maybe he had seen it before, in himself, years ago when Greg Marshall had given him a reason to believe he could be more than just another kid lost to the streets. The next morning, Ethan found himself parked outside the police headquarters. It was against his better judgment, but something about Malik's situation didn't sit right with him. He wasn't just the police chief's son, he was a kid standing at a crossroads, teetering between the right path and the one that led to nowhere good. Ethan knew what it felt like to be that kid, and he wasn't about to walk away. He barely had time to gather his thoughts before the station doors swung open. Raymond Johnson stepped out, his face unreadable, but his sharp eyes immediately locked onto Ethan. "What are you doing here, Officer Carter?" Raymond's voice was as commanding as ever, but there was a hint of curiosity behind the sternness. Ethan hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I wanted to check on Malik." Raymond's expression hardened. "He's fine. I don't doubt that, sir, but I think he needs someone to talk to." Raymond narrowed his eyes. "And you think that person should be you?" Ethan straightened his shoulders. "Yes, sir. I know what it's like to be a kid in his position. And I know what it's like to have someone pull you back before it's too late." There was a long pause before Raymond finally sighed. "Come with me." Ethan followed the police chief into the station, down the hall, and into a private office. Seated in a chair, arms crossed and scowling at the floor, was Malik. The boy looked up when they entered, surprise flickering in his eyes when he saw Ethan. "Carter wants to talk to you," Raymond said before turning to Ethan. 5 minutes. With that, the chief stepped out, leaving them alone. Ethan pulled up a chair and sat across from Malik. The boy's expression was guarded, but he wasn't looking away this time. "You okay?" Ethan asked. Malik scoffed. "You're the second cop to ask me that in the last 24 hours. "Well, maybe it's because we actually care," Ethan countered. Malik shifted uncomfortably but didn't reply. Ethan leaned forward. "Look, kid, I get it. You're trying to figure things out. And you think you had to do it alone. But you don't. I know you care about your cousin. And I know you think you can help him. But there's a right way to do things and a wrong way. Malik frowned. You don't know anything about Jamal. No, but I know that getting caught up in his world isn't gonna help either of you. Malik looked away, his fingers tightening into fists. Ethan could see the conflict in his expression. He was a good kid. He just didn't know how to prove it. I want to help you, Malik, Ethan continued, but you have to let me. Malik hesitated. Then, slowly, he met Ethan's gaze. Why do you care? Ethan smiled slightly. Because someone once cared about me when they didn't have to. And it changed everything. For the first time since they met. Malik seemed to lower his guard. Just a little. Okay, he murmured. But I'm not a kid who needs saving. Ethan chuckled. Good, because I'm not trying to save you. Just looking out for you. Malik nodded. And though it was subtle, Ethan knew they had reached an understanding. A promise was made that day, one neither of them fully understood yet. But it would change everything. Malik had never been one to blindly follow rules. He had grown up watching his father enforce them, seeing the way people looked at the police, with fear, with resentment, sometimes with outright hatred. His father had always told him that the law was there to protect people. But Malik wasn't so sure anymore. Jamal had been proof of that. His cousin had made mistakes. Sure, but the system had already decided who he was before he even had a chance to prove otherwise. That was why Malik had gone to see him. He wanted to understand, he wanted to help, but he hadn't expected to get caught in the middle of something bigger. It was late, the city alive with the distant hum of traffic and neon lights. Malik walked through the narrow streets. His hoodie pulled up, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He knew where to find Jamal. The old auto shop at the end of the block. The one that was supposed to be shut down but still had cars coming in and out at all hours of the night. When he got there, he saw Jamal leaning against the wall, talking to a man Malik didn't recognize. Something about the guy put him on edge. Jamal spotted him first. His eyes widened in surprise before narrowing in irritation. What the hell are you doing here, little man? Malik ignored the question. I need to talk to you. Jamal sighed, rubbing his temple. Now's not a good time. The man beside him chuckled. This your little cousin? Thought you said he was smart. Malik bristled but stayed quiet. He didn't like the way the man looked at him, like he was sizing him up. Go home, Malik, Jamal said, his voice low but firm. No, Malik shot back. You're in trouble, aren't you? Jamal's jaw tightened. I can handle myself. Really? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're about to do something stupid. The man beside Jamal chuckled again. Kid's got a mouth on him. Jamal turned to Malik, his voice sharper now. I said go home. Malik hesitated. He wanted to push, to demand answers, but something in Jamal's expression told him this wasn't a game. So he turned and walked away. But he didn't go home. Instead, he went to find Ethan. Ethan was just finishing his coffee when there was a knock on his apartment door. He wasn't expecting company, especially not this late. When he opened the door, he was surprised to see Malik standing there. The kid looked nervous. What's going on? Ethan asked, stepping aside. Malik hesitated before walking in. He paced the small living room for a moment before finally blurting out. I think Jamal's in trouble. Ethan tensed. What kind of trouble? Malik hesitated. He was with this guy. I don't know who he is. But he felt wrong. Ethan studied Malik carefully. The kid was worried, and he wasn't the type to get scared easily. You did the right thing coming to me, Ethan said, but if Jamal's involved with people he shouldn't be, you need to stay away. Malik's expression hardened. I can't just abandon him. Ethan sighed. I know, but helping him doesn't mean putting yourself in danger. Malik bit his lip. So what do we do? Ethan leaned back against the counter, thinking. It was time to have a difficult conversation with the chief. Ethan sat across from Raymond Johnson in his office. The older man's expression was unreadable as he listened to Ethan's concerns. You're telling me my son went looking for Jamal? Raymond said finally. Yes, Ethan confirmed, and from what he told me, Jamal's in deep. Raymond's jaw clenched. I warned that boy. With all due respect, sir, warnings don't mean much when someone feels like they have no way out. Raymond exhaled sharply. So what do you suggest? Ethan met his gaze. Let me help Malik. Let me help Jamal. Before it's too late. Raymond studied him for a long moment before nodding. Do what you have to do, Carter. And with that, the real battle began. The city was alive with the hum of distant sirens and the occasional honking of car horns. But in the quieter backstreets, another story was unfolding. Ethan Carter sat in his unmarked police car, parked near an old auto repair shop where Jamal was last seen. His instincts screamed at him. Something was happening. Something big. Malik had told him about the mysterious man Jamal was with. If Jamal was in deeper than they thought, time was running out. Ethan wasn't the type to wait for trouble to come knocking. He intended to meet it head-on. Just as he was about to step out of the car, movement in the alley caught his eye. Two figures emerged from the shadows. One of them was Jamal. The other was the man Malik had described. The stranger was tall, broad-shouldered, with a calculated coldness in his movements. Even from a distance, Ethan could tell he was dangerous. Jamal looked tense, his shoulders hunched, his body language screaming discomfort. Whatever deal they were making, he wasn't in control. Then, suddenly, Jamal turned on his heel and bolted. "Damn it," Ethan muttered. The stranger shouted something and took off after him. Ethan threw his car door open, sprinting into the alley without hesitation. The narrow passage was slick with rain from earlier that evening, making every step treacherous. He could hear Jamal's ragged breaths up ahead, his footsteps slapping against the pavement. The man chasing him was gaining fast. Ethan pushed himself harder, his heart pounding against his ribs. Jamal skidded around a corner, nearly slipping, and Ethan saw his chance. With a well-timed burst of speed, he lunged, grabbing the back of Jamal's hoodie and yanking him out of harm's way just as the stranger reached for him. The man snarled, stopping short. For a second, his gaze met Ethan's, cold, calculating, and full of menace. Then, without warning, he turned and ran. Ethan started to go after him, but Jamal gasped, "Don't, he's not alone. If you chase him, you won't like what you find." Ethan hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to pursue. But Jamal's words held weight. If this was bigger than one man, he needed to be smart. He let the stranger disappear into the darkness. Then, turning to Jamal, he said, "Start talking, now." Jamal sat in the dimly lit diner across from Ethan, his leg bouncing anxiously under the table. The small restaurant was nearly empty, save for an old man nursing a cup of coffee at the counter and a tired-looking waitress who barely paid them any mind. Ethan leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "Who was that man, Jamal?" Jamal swallowed hard. "His name's Rocco. He runs the crew on the east side. Drugs, guns, whatever makes money." Ethan clenched his jaw. "And what does he want from you?" Jamal rubbed his hands together, his shoulders slumping. "I got in over my head. Man, I borrowed money, more than I could pay back. At first, it was just a small job here and there, moving packages. Then he wanted more, said I owed him, said I belonged to him now." Ethan exhaled sharply. "So why did you run tonight?" Jamal hesitated. "Because I was supposed to do something I couldn't." Ethan's stomach tightened. "What?" Jamal's voice dropped to a whisper. "I was supposed to drop a bag in a school parking lot." Ethan's blood ran cold. "You mean drugs?" Jamal nodded. "Yeah, and not just any drugs. The kind that gets people killed. I couldn't do it, man, but now Rocco thinks I'm a problem." Ethan's mind raced. This wasn't just about Jamal anymore, this was bigger. If a known gang was using people like Jamal to push drugs near schools, the entire city was at risk. "You need protection," Ethan said. Jamal laughed bitterly. "From who? The cops? They'd rather throw me in a cell than help me." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Not me." Jamal studied him carefully. "Why do you care so much?" Ethan thought of Malik, of the promise he had made. "Because someone has to." Jamal looked down, his fingers drumming against the table. "There's a way to end this." Ethan frowned. "How?" Jamal took a deep breath. "I'll help you take down Rocco. But you have to promise me something." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "What?" Jamal met his gaze. "That you'll keep Malik out of this." Ethan nodded. "I swear." Jamal exhaled slowly. "Then let's do this." Ethan knew this was risky. Jamal was willing to work with them. But Rocco wasn't stupid. A man like that didn't stay in power by trusting easily. If they were going to bring him down, they needed a plan. And it had to be airtight. Sitting in a private meeting room at the precinct, Ethan laid everything out for Raymond Johnson. The police chief listened intently, his fingers steepled together as Ethan spoke. When Ethan finished, Raymond exhaled slowly. "You want me to trust a known gang associate?" I want you to trust that he wants out. Ethan corrected. And that he's our best shot at taking Rocco down before more kids get caught up in this. Raymond leaned back, thoughtful. And Malik? I gave my word to keep him out of it. Raymond studied Ethan carefully, then nodded. All right, we do this by the book. No shortcuts, no risks. Ethan nodded. Understood. Jamal was wired up that night, sitting at a dingy bar where Rocco's men liked to gather. He kept his posture relaxed, his face neutral, but Ethan could see the tension in his shoulders as he listened in from the van outside. Then, Rocco's voice came through the wire. You got some nerve coming back here. Jamal. Jamal laughed casually. Gotta eat. Man. There was a long pause. Then Rocco spoke again. Fine, but this time, you're gonna prove yourself. Ethan's gut twisted. This was the moment of truth. What do you need? Jamal asked, keeping his voice steady. Rocco chuckled darkly. Something big. There was a rustling sound. Then Rocco's next words sent a chill down Ethan's spine. I need you to take care of a cop. The air in the surveillance van went ice cold. Ethan locked eyes with the other officers, his grip tightening on his earpiece. Jamal hesitated just a fraction of a second before replying. A cop? Rocco hummed. Yeah, someone's been sniffing around too much. Time to send a message. Ethan took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. This was the break they needed, but it also meant Jamal was in even deeper than they had feared. Jamal's voice was careful. Which cop? There was a pause. Then Rocco said two words that made Ethan's heart stop. Ethan Carter. A cold sweat broke out across Ethan's skin, but he stayed silent, listening. Jamal laughed, but there was a slight tremor in his voice. That's a big ask. Man, you in or not? Rocco demanded. Ethan's pulse pounded. If Jamal didn't play this right, his cover would be blown. Jamal took a slow breath, then said, I'm in. Ethan closed his eyes. The game had just turned deadly. And now, it was personal. Jamal could feel the sweat forming at the back of his neck as he leaned back in his chair. Trying to act like what Rocco had just said didn't send ice through his veins. He had always known this game was dangerous, but now it had turned lethal. Ethan Carter. That was the name Rocco had given him. A man Jamal had just started to trust. The only person who had treated him like more than a lost cause. He couldn't hesitate too long. Rocco would smell fear like blood in the water. Jamal forced a chuckle, shaking his head. Damn, man, that's some serious heat. Rocco leaned forward, a cigarette dangling between his fingers, his sharp eyes narrowing. You got a problem with that? Jamal shook his head quickly. Nah, just didn't expect you to go that big. A cop? That's next level. Rocco smirked. Yeah, well, Carter's been poking around too much. And I don't like cops who don't know their place. He took a drag from his cigarette before exhaling slowly. Consider it your way back in. Jamal, show me you're serious. And you're good. Jamal forced himself to nod, even as his heart slammed against his ribcage. All right, how you want it done? The question seemed to satisfy Rocco. He gestured toward one of his men, who slid a burner phone across the table. You'll get details soon. Just be ready. Jamal nodded and picked up the phone. It felt heavier than it should have. His fate, and Ethan's, rested in whatever message came next. Back in the surveillance van, Ethan sat motionless, his hands clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. He had heard every word, every breath of that conversation. They wanted him dead. He had been in plenty of dangerous situations before. But this was different. This wasn't just some anonymous threat or a job gone wrong. This was a planned hit. And the person meant to carry it out? Jamal. Raymond Johnson stood next to him, his face unreadable, but his jaw was set in a hard line. We need to pull him out, the chief said. Now. Ethan shook his head. No, if we do that, we lose our shot at Rocco. This is the closest we've gotten to nailing him. Raymond's expression darkened. And what happens when Rocco decides to test Jamal's loyalty? What if he demands proof? Ethan exhaled sharply. That was the question, wasn't it? How far would Rocco go to make sure Jamal was really on his side? A buzzing sound filled the van. The burner phone Jamal had been given was vibrating. The message had come through. Jamal stared at the screen, then let out a slow, measured breath. They want it done in 48 hours. Ethan locked eyes with him through the surveillance feed. The next 2 days would determine everything. Ethan and Jamal sat in a darkened parking lot, the only light coming from the glowing dashboard of Ethan's car. They had no time to waste. Every second counted now. Jamal rubbed his hands together, his leg bouncing nervously. This is insane. Man, what if they want proof? What if they don't buy it? Ethan exhaled slowly. We'll give them proof, just not the kind they expect. Jamal frowned. What does that mean? Ethan reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a small, high-tech device, an advanced blood squib, the kind used in Hollywood stunt scenes. It could simulate a bullet impact, complete with a spray of fake blood. Jamal's eyebrows shot up. You serious? Ethan nodded. We stage the hit. Make it look real. Once Rocco thinks I'm out of the picture, he'll let his guard down. Jamal swallowed hard. You trust me to pull this off? Ethan met his gaze, his voice firm. I wouldn't be sitting here if I didn't. Jamal looked away for a moment, then nodded. All right, let's do this. That night, the plan went into motion. They picked a secluded alley, one of the places Rocco's men were known to watch. Jamal stood 10 feet away, his hands shaking as he held the gun Ethan had given him. It wasn't loaded, but the weight of it was enough to make his stomach churn. Ethan braced himself. Make it look real, he murmured. Jamal took a deep breath, aimed, and pulled the trigger. A loud pop echoed through the alley as the blood squib detonated on Ethan's chest. He staggered backward, collapsing onto the pavement. Jamal's breath came fast and uneven, but he forced himself to keep moving. He took a quick picture with the burner phone, sending it to Rocco. Then he turned and ran. Ethan lay motionless, listening to his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. Now, they waited. The message came within minutes. Rocco's voice was a short, clipped text. Good work. Now don't disappear. Jamal read it 3 times before letting out a slow breath. He had done it. He had convinced them, but they weren't out of the woods yet. Meanwhile, Ethan had been taken to a safe house. Out of sight, out of mind. He couldn't risk being seen in public, not until this was over. Raymond visited him the next morning, standing over his bed with arms crossed. You realize you just faked your own death, right? Ethan smirked weakly. Not the first time I've had a near-death experience. The chief shook his head. Rocco's not stupid. If he suspects for even a second that this was staged, Jamal's as good as dead. I know, Ethan admitted. That's why we had to move fast. Jamal was still on the inside. He had gained Rocco's trust. But the deeper he went, the harder it would be to get out. That night, Jamal received another message. Meet at the docks. Midnight. We have another job for you. Jamal's stomach turned. He had done everything right. But now, he was in deeper than ever. And the next job might be the one that got him killed. The night air was thick with humidity as Jamal made his way toward the docks. His heart pounding like a war drum in his chest. He had pulled off the impossible, convincing Rocco that Ethan was dead, but now he was walking straight into the lion's den. He had no idea what awaited him. The docks were eerily quiet, except for the distant sound of waves lapping against the wooden piers and the occasional creak of metal containers stacked high. A few dimly lit floodlights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows on the pavement. Jamal spotted Rocco standing near the water's edge, flanked by 2 of his men. They were smoking, their faces half hidden by the darkness. But their eyes were sharp and watching. Jamal swallowed hard, forcing himself to keep his steps even. He had to act natural. He had to make them believe he was all in. Rocco turned as he approached, exhaling a cloud of smoke. Took you long enough, he muttered. Jamal kept his expression neutral. You said midnight. I'm here. One of the men chuckled under his breath. But Rocco just smirked. You did good with Carter, he said, taking a slow drag from his cigarette. Almost makes me think I can trust you again. Jamal knew that almost was the key word. He wasn't safe yet. I told you. I'm done running. Rocco nodded, studying him. Then he gestured toward a nearby warehouse. Got another job for you. Jamal clenched his jaw. He knew this moment was coming. What kind of job? Rocco's smirk faded. A delivery. Simple. No questions asked. Jamal glanced toward the warehouse. He had no idea what was inside. But he could guess. Drugs. Weapons. Something illegal. Something that would pull him deeper into this world if he went through with it. He took a steady breath. Where's it going? Rocco flicked his cigarette into the water. Cops have been getting too close to our business. We're moving product out of town. Keeping it quiet. You and the guys are driving it out tonight. Jamal's stomach twisted. If he went along with this, he was officially aiding a criminal operation. But if he refused, they'd know something was up. He needed an out, and he needed it fast. "All right," he said, nodding. "I'm in." Rocco clapped him on the shoulder. "That's what I like to hear." Jamal forced a grin, but inside, his mind was racing. He needed to get word to Ethan. And he needed to do it before it was too late. Ethan sat in the dimly lit safe house, his fingers drumming against the table as he listened to the latest update. Raymond Johnson stood beside him, his arms crossed, his expression hard as stone. "He's in," one of the undercover officers reported. "They're making a move tonight." Ethan exhaled sharply. "What's the target?" The officer glanced at his notes. "They're transporting a shipment out of the city. We don't know the exact contents. But if Rocco's involved, it's big." Raymond's expression darkened. "And my son is in the middle of it." Ethan looked up. "He's playing his part, but we need to get him out before they suspect him." Raymond nodded, but his frustration was evident. He hated being on the sidelines while his son was tangled up with criminals. Ethan turned back to the officer. "Do we have a location?" The man nodded. "They're using an old trucking route off the interstate. Minimal traffic, easy to control. If we're going to intercept, that's our best shot." Ethan pushed back from the table, standing. "Then let's do it." Raymond placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "You'd better bring my son back in one piece." Ethan met his gaze. "I intend to." He strapped on his vest, checked his sidearm, and prepared for what was about to be the most dangerous night of his life. Jamal gripped the steering wheel, his hands slick with sweat. The truck rumbled beneath him, the headlights illuminating the empty highway as they sped toward their destination. 2 other cars followed behind, Rocco's men, making sure he didn't try anything stupid. He kept his breathing steady, trying to ignore the weight of the situation. He was driving straight into a setup, and the second Ethan made his move, all hell would break loose. Rocco's voice crackled over the radio. "Keep it steady, Jamal. No mistakes." Jamal swallowed hard. "Got it." Up ahead, the highway stretched into darkness. But just beyond that darkness, Ethan and the police were waiting. The moment arrived in a flash. Suddenly, bright floodlights flared on from the trees lining the road, blinding them. The sound of screeching tires and sirens filled the night air. Then came the voices, shouting commands. The unmistakable click of weapons being drawn. "This is the police. Pull over now." Panic erupted. The men in the car behind him swore, scrambling for their guns. Jamal slammed his foot on the brakes, jerking the truck to a stop. The doors of the pursuing cars flew open, and Rocco's men leapt out, firing blindly into the night. Bullets cracked against the pavement. Police officers shouted as they took cover. Jamal hit the ground, shielding his head as chaos exploded around him. He heard Ethan's voice cutting through the noise. "Jamal, stay down." Jamal turned just in time to see Rocco emerging from one of the cars. His face twisted in fury, and he was aiming a gun right at Ethan. Time slowed. Jamal saw Rocco raise the gun, saw the way Ethan moved instinctively, shifting his stance. He didn't have time to think, didn't have time to question. He just acted. He lunged forward, slamming into Rocco with all his strength. The gun went off, a deafening crack that echoed through the night. Pain seared through Jamal's shoulder. But he didn't stop. He knocked Rocco to the ground, wrestling the gun from his grip. Ethan was there in an instant, pinning Rocco down, wrenching the weapon from his hands. Police officers swarmed in, restraining the rest of Rocco's men. Jamal gasped, pressing a hand to his shoulder. Blood seeped through his fingers. His vision swam. Ethan caught him before he collapsed. "Stay with me, kid. You're gonna be okay." The last thing Jamal saw before his vision faded was his father, Raymond Johnson, running toward him, his face stricken with worry. And then everything went dark. Jamal woke up in a hospital room, the steady beep of a heart monitor filling the silence. His shoulder ached, but he was alive. His father sat beside him, exhaustion etched into his features. "You scared the hell out of me," Raymond muttered. Jamal swallowed. "Did we get him?" Raymond nodded. "Rocco's going away for a long time." Jamal let out a slow breath, relief washing over him. The door opened, and Ethan stepped inside, a small smile on his face. "You did good, kid." Jamal smirked. "Told you I didn't need saving." Ethan chuckled. "No, but you saved me." Jamal met his gaze, realizing in that moment that everything had changed. He wasn't just some kid from the streets anymore. He was something more. And for the first time in a long time, he had a future worth fighting for.